I walked into one of the fanciest restaurants in Portland, soaked to the skin, my dress literally dripping mud onto the marble floor, and the CEO I was supposed to be meeting actually started to stand up, like he was about to walk out on me, but a few weeks later, that same man would risk his entire company and his job because of me and my 7-year-old daughter, and people would call me everything from gold digger to homewrecker to unexpected hero online. My name is Audrey. I'm a single mom and an elementary school art teacher, and this is the story of how one broken car and one stupid puddle flipped my whole life inside out, for better and for worse. It started on a Thursday night in downtown Portland, the kind of night where the rain feels personal, pounding on the windshield of my 15-year-old sedan and like it's trying to punch its way in. And my heart was already doing that nervous little tap dance because it was my first date in 3 years. First time I'd put on lipstick that cost more than $5. First time I'd tried to remember what it felt like to be a woman, and not just Penny's mom. My best friend Melanie had bullied me into it. She works with Ryan's sister at some big office, and she swore up and down, Audrey, he's not a creep, he's not a player. He's actually a decent guy who happens to be the most eligible bachelor in Portland. Do you know how many strings I pulled to get him to agree to a blind date? You are going, even if you have to crawl there. I was staring at myself in the rearview mirror at a red light. Chestnut hair actually behaving. For once, my emerald green dress hugging my body in a way I hadn't seen since before Penny was born. And for about 10 seconds, I actually recognized the woman looking back at me. Then the light turned green, my car coughed twice like a dying animal, and the engine just quit. I coasted to the side of a busy street while people honked, like I had personally ruined their lives, hit the hazard lights, and sat there listening to the wipers screech across an empty windshield, rain roaring all around, thinking of course this would happen tonight. Of course. I called Melanie, already fighting back tears, and said, "The car's dead. I'm 6 blocks away. Just tell him I'm sorry. I'll text him and cancel. I can't show up like this." And she cut me off immediately. Absolutely not. Audrey, you told Penny this morning that her mom is brave and doesn't give up just because something's hard. You really want to prove yourself a liar on top of everything. Lock the car and walk. You're going to that restaurant if you have to swim there. I hate when my friends use my own mom's speeches against me, but she was right. So I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, locked my poor dying sedan, and stepped out into cold, sideways rain in heels I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding. By the 3rd block, my umbrella had flipped inside out and tried to escape. The wind was whipping my hair straight into my lip gloss, and the sidewalks had turned into this disgusting obstacle course of puddles and construction mud. You know, that kind of night where the city feels like it's laughing at you. And then I hit the construction zone. They had this makeshift plywood walkway laid out over a trench, slick with rain and dirt, and I remember thinking, just don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. And of course, that's exactly when my heel slid right off the edge, and I went down face first into a pool of brown water that smelled like every bad decision I've ever made. Not a cute little stumble, not a graceful drop to my knees. I full body slammed into that puddle like a cartoon character. The cold shot straight through the front of my dress, my legs, my pride. And when I pushed myself up, I could feel mud clinging from my chest to my hem, gritty on my skin, streaking down my arms, mascara already running in black lines, and some stranger in a raincoat jogged over like, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And I just laughed, this broken little laugh, and said, I'm fine, even though I felt anything but fine. I stood there in the rain for a second, shaking my teeth. Chattering fingers curled around my keys, ready to turn back, ready to call Melanie and say, "You win, the universe clearly doesn't want me to date." And then I heard my daughter's voice in my head, clear, as if she were standing next to me. "Mommy, you always tell me to be brave." And that stupid little sentence hit harder than the fall, Because the truth was, I didn't feel brave at all. I felt like the girl who always shows up a little late, a little messy, never quite fitting in. But I didn't want that to be the version of me Penny carried around in her chest. So I wiped off what mud I could, which honestly did nothing, squared my shoulders, and kept walking toward the glowing little sign of Elysian, this upscale restaurant I had only ever seen on Instagram. When I stepped inside, everything went quiet. In that way you never want: warm golden light, white tablecloths, polished glasses, and one dripping mud-streaked disaster of a woman standing at the entrance, heels squelching softly on the marble. And you could feel people turning their heads, forks pausing halfway to their mouths, that little ripple of judgment going through the room like, why is she here? The hostess blinked at me, trying so hard to keep her professional smile, and I croaked out, I'm meeting someone reservation for Ryan Walsh. And that's when I saw him. Back near the windows, charcoal suit, dark hair, the kind of posture that says, boardrooms, listen when he talks. And I watched his expression shift in real time from mild annoyance, like my date is late, to total shock as he realized the creature dripping onto the floor might be the woman he was supposed to sit with. And his hand went to the back of his chair like he was about to stand up and quietly vanish through the kitchen. If he had walked out right then, I honestly wouldn't have blamed him. I would have just added it to the long list of reasons why Audrey shouldn't try to date. But instead, something in his face changed, like he actually looked past the mud for half a second and saw I was more than some punchline, and he froze halfway up, then slowly sat back down and just watched me come over like he was trying to figure out what on earth to do. I almost chickened out at the last second. My body actually turned toward the door, but somehow my feet kept going, and suddenly I was standing at his table dripping onto their ridiculously expensive rug, and I heard myself say, "Oh, I'm Audrey. I am so sorry." My car died 6 blocks away, and then I fell in a puddle, and I completely understand if you want to pretend you never met me, and I tried to joke. We can just call this a rain check, literally, but my voice wobbled. For a second, he just stared, and I could see that CEO brain doing calculations. This does not fit into my plan. This is not what I signed up for. And then he stood, very calmly, like we were in some old movie, pulled out my chair and said, "Please sit down. I think anyone who goes through all that to show up deserves at least a glass of wine." The waiter approached with that tight look restaurants get when something doesn't fit their aesthetic. His eyes flicking to my muddy dress, and Ryan didn't even let him start. He said, "The lady will have a glass of the Bordeaux, and can we get some extra napkins," in that quiet, firm tone that says, "Do not argue with me about this," and the poor guy just nodded and vanished. That was the first time I saw the side of Ryan everyone talks about, the man who can make a room move with one look, and he was using it to protect me, the swamp monster at his table. I started rambling, 'cause that's what I do when I'm nervous, telling him about the car dying. Melanie yelling at me over the phone, the construction site, the fall, and halfway through, I realized I was actually laughing at myself, really laughing. Not that tight little, "it's fine" laugh you use with other moms in the school pickup line. And he was laughing too, not in a mean way, but like he genuinely found the story wild and kind of impressive. As the night went on, my dress dried into this weird, stiff mud armor, but we stopped noticing it. The conversation just flowed. I learned he was the CEO of a fast-growing sustainable energy company, that he'd grown up watching his parents stressed about bills and power outages, that he'd built this whole empire out of wanting to make life easier for people like them. And he learned about my art classroom. Little kids painting suns with purple and gluing their sleeves to the paper, about being a single mom, since Penny's dad decided he wasn't cut out for family life and walked out when she was 4. I was honest in a way I hadn't been with a man in years. I told him I was tired most days, that my life was messy and loud and held together with coupons and coffee, that I hadn't gone on a date in 3 years, because between lesson plans and bedtime stories, there just wasn't room. And I waited for that flicker of judgment, that look I've seen before that says, "Oh, she's got baggage," and instead he just shook his head and said quietly, "Or maybe you're the strongest person in the room, and no one ever gave you credit for it." And I had to look down at my napkin for a second, so I wouldn't cry right there in front of the fancy people. Somewhere across the restaurant, I saw a flash, someone sneaking a picture of us, but I didn't think about it too much. I was too busy feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. When the night ended, he insisted on calling a car service, so I wouldn't have to walk back in the rain, and as I slid into the back seat, he leaned down and said, "If it's okay with you, I'd like this to not be just a funny story. You tell your friends about the worst first date ever," and I went home with wet hair mud in my laundry basket, and this tiny flame of hope in my chest I didn't quite trust. The next morning, that little flame was tested fast, because I woke up to my 7-year-old bouncing on my bed with my phone in her hand saying, "Mom, you're on the internet." And sure enough, there it was on some local gossip page, a picture of me muddy dress, and all leaning across the table laughing, and Ryan smiling at me like I was the only person in the restaurant, captioned, "CEO Ryan Walsh, slumming it at Elysian with Mystery Woman last night." And the comments were brutal people making jokes about me crawling out of a ditch, about him slumming about whether I was a social experiment or a charity case. And for a minute my stomach just dropped, and I thought, great, I ruined his image and my life in one night. You know what I mean. Then his name popped up on my screen. His text said, "Well, looks like we're famous. Breakfast tomorrow, I know a place where they don't mind a little mud." And just like that, the panic eased, because he wasn't running, he was doubling down. He took me to this little diner called Ruby's, all chipped mugs and vinyl booths. No white tablecloths. And when I walked in, actually clean this time in jeans and a sweater, he grinned and said, "You look different when you're not wrestling alligators in a construction site." And I said I considered rolling around in my garden first, to keep expectations realistic, and it felt easy, surprisingly easy. Over pancakes and coffee, we talked about real things. My fears about bringing anyone into Penny's life, how I hadn't introduced her to a single person I'd dated, because I only wanted her to meet someone if it was serious. His complicated relationship with his late father, who never thought what he did was good enough, his obsession with schedules and control because he'd grown up in chaos. He asked about Penny like he actually cared. Not like he was checking some box, and when I told him she loved dinosaurs and glitter, and had once tried to improve our neighbor's cat with purple markers, he laughed and said, "She sounds amazing, like her mom," and my face went hot. In that way you hope people can't see. At one point I blurted out, "I don't really date between teaching and being a mom. And honestly, introducing someone to her would have to be for something real." And then I panicked and started backpedaling. "I'm not saying this is that we barely know each other. You're you. I'm me with my chaos and my kid." And he reached across the table and tapped the back of my hand and said, "Audrey, breathe." I asked because I'm interested, not because I'm looking for an excuse to leave. And that line kind of stuck somewhere deep where old hurts used to be. Over the next couple of weeks, he didn't just talk, he showed up. Coffee on my desk after a brutal morning, with glue-covered first graders, texts asking how Penny's science project went, movie nights on my couch, where he helped her build a model solar system that actually spun while we ate microwave popcorn. And I watched my daughter, who had every reason to be wary of men, just trust him on against his shoulder, call him to show off her drawings, and I won't lie. Part of me was terrified by how fast it was all moving, and how right it felt at the same time. When her elementary school announced the annual art showcase, Penny worked for weeks on a painting she refused to let me see until the night of the show. And when Ryan promised he'd be there front row, my kid lit up like Christmas. But of course, life doesn't care about your nice plans. A couple days before the show, Ryan called from his office, sounding tense, and said, "We've got an emergency meeting with a huge investor in Chicago. The board is freaking out. If we don't land this funding round, a whole division might be in trouble. I'm trying to keep Friday night clear, but I don't know if I can," and I told him I understood, because I did, even while my heart sank a little. He ended up sending a car for us the night before his flight, inviting us to his downtown penthouse so we could have dinner while he packed, and watching Penny run around that giant glass-walled apartment, talking about how the bathtub was bigger than Grandma's kitchen, and how we could totally live here and get a dog because there's so much space. I felt that weird mix of pride and embarrassment that comes when your kid says the quiet part out loud. And when she announced at the dinner table, "I painted our family for the art show. It's me and Mom and you and a dog we don't have yet," I almost choked on my pasta. Ryan just smiled. But later that night, after he got the call that his flight had been moved up and he had to leave for Chicago immediately, I saw the regret in his eyes when he knelt down and told Penny, "I'm so sorry I might miss the show. But when I get back, I want a private viewing, just us, and I promise I will clap the loudest." And she gave him this serious little nod, like she was forgiving a great crime. And on the car ride home, my phone buzzed with his text, "Miss you already. This doesn't feel right." And I stared at it for a long time, feeling something shift. The day of the art show arrived with another Portland downpour. My classroom turned into chaos as kids tried to mount their artwork straight, while I snuck glances at my phone reading updates from Ryan about endless investor questions and slide decks. And I hate being this far away tonight. And by late afternoon, everything in the gym was ready to go. I rushed home to get Penny into her fancy dress, only to find her curled on the couch, cheeks flushed, saying her tummy hurt, and the thermometer blinked back 101.2 like a cruel little scoreboard. There went the show. I called the school to explain, texted Ryan. "She's sick. We're missing the showcase. Don't worry about it. Focus on your meeting." And a few minutes later, he called from outside the Chicago conference room, voice tight with worry, saying, "Is she okay? Do you need anything?" I hate that I'm not there. And I told him we'd be fine because that's what moms do. We say we're fine even when we feel like we're dropping balls left and right. That night, while Penny dozed off and on to cartoons, there was a knock at my door, and when I opened it, it was Ms. Garcia, our principal, holding a big canvas and smiling. I thought Penny might want this, and she set the painting on our coffee table, pulled off the cloth, and revealed my daughter's work, now with a blue ribbon attached, that read Principal's Choice Award. The painting was simple in that kid way. 3 figures holding hands in front of a house, bright colors, a huge sun in the corner. But the details just punched me in the chest. Penny in her dinosaur shirt, me in my green dress without the mud, and Ryan tall beside us wearing a superhero cape. And when Ms. Garcia asked her what it was, Penny said, "Very matter of fact, it's our family. Ryan couldn't come because he had to save his company in Chicago, so I made him a superhero, and I honestly had to look away." After the principal left, I took a picture of Penny holding her ribbon, then a close-up of the painting, and sent them to Ryan, expecting maybe a text back when his meeting was over. Instead, he replied almost instantly, "She sees us as a family," and then after a heartbeat, "I can't sit in this boardroom and pretend that doesn't matter. I need to be there." His phone went dark after that, straight to voicemail, and I spent the night half caring for my feverish kid, half wondering what exactly he meant. Be here emotionally, be here when the trip was over, or literally walk out of the biggest meeting of his career. The answer showed up on my doorstep the next day around lunchtime, when I opened the door in leggings and an oversized t-shirt covered in soup stains, and found him there, jet-lagged, tie, loosened hair, a mess, holding a bouquet of wildflowers from some airport kiosk and a stuffed dinosaur. "You're supposed to be in Chicago," I blurted, and he stepped inside and said, "I was." But I couldn't sit there and listen to a man talk about profit while I knew the people who actually matter to me were here without me. And he told me plain and simple that he had gotten up in the middle of Victor Hayes's presentation, said, "We'll continue this discussion later," and flown home. And now the board was furious. The investor was insulted, and his position as CEO was officially under review. My first reaction wasn't swooning. It was anger and fear, because I knew exactly what people would say. That he threw everything away for a woman with mud on her dress and a sick kid, that I was some kind of distraction. And I heard myself snapping. "Why would you do that, Ryan? Do you have any idea how much guilt that puts on me, on us, that you worked your whole life for this company?" And he just looked at me with this calm I didn't feel and said, "Because for the first time I realized if I lost all of that and still had you and Penny, I'd be okay. But if I kept all of that and lost this, I'd be completely empty and..." Yeah, I know it sounds like a line from a movie, but in that kitchen with Penny coughing softly on the couch and rain hitting the windows, it felt painfully, terrifyingly real. The twist, the part nobody saw coming, happened a couple days later when I got called to the front office at school in the middle of my third grade class and walked out expecting maybe a parent complaint, and instead found Victor Hayes himself waiting. The very investor Ryan had walked out on gray hair, sharp suit expression, like he eats CEOs for breakfast, and he shook my hand and said, "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you're the reason Ryan Walsh left our meeting," and my spine just locked, ready to be blamed, ready to say, "I didn't ask him to come back, but before I could, he kept going, telling me he'd spent 40 years investing in men who would stay in their chairs while their lives fell apart around them, that he'd been furious when Ryan left, and then started wondering what it would be like to back someone whose priorities weren't for sale, someone whose word to a child mattered as much as his word to a board." And by the end of that conversation, he handed me his card and said, "Please tell Mr. Walsh I would like to proceed with our investment under one condition, that he remains CEO, because I only want to back a company led by someone who understands what really matters." And I remember leaning against the copier after he left, thinking I could not make this up if I tried. That afternoon crawled by until Ryan finally showed up outside my building, picking Penny up in his arms, and told me the board had voted to keep him, that Hayes had not only come back in, but increased his offer and promised to connect them with other socially conscious investors, and that the very thing the board had labeled a distraction had become the proof of his character. That night in my cramped living room, while Penny showed him a drawing of a house with 3 stick figures and a dog, and announced, "This is where we're going to live," he looked at me differently, like a man who had made his choice and wasn't going to apologize for it. And when he pulled a ring box from his pocket a few minutes later and asked me if I would be his family, for real, voice shaking, just a little, as he said he loved my chaos and my resilience, that he loved Penny's dinosaurs and big heart, that he wanted to build a life where board meetings and art shows could both matter, and neither one had to be sacrificed. Every time I said yes, Penny screamed yes, and immediately asked if she could be the flower girl, and we all ended up in a laughing, crying pile on the couch. 6 months later, we stood in the backyard of the little house Penny had drawn, complete with a rescue dog. She insisted we name Muddy in honor of how this whole crazy story started. Friends and family around us, Ryan's company thriving, after the merger with Hayes's backing, and right in the middle of the reception, framed and hanging from a string of lights, was that painting. Me, Penny, and Ryan with his superhero cape. The painting that had made a CEO walk out of a boardroom and an investor question his own legacy. People online still argue about it, by the way. Some say he was reckless, that no relationship is worth risking a company. Others say it's about time someone with power chose a child's art show over another pile of money. Some people think I trapped him. Some call me lucky. Some call me inspiring. And I guess that's why I wanted to tell the story in my own words, as the girl in the muddy dress who just kept walking because her kid believed she was brave. So I'll leave it with you. If you were in Ryan's shoes, sitting in that room, with a life-changing deal on the table and a text on your phone about a sick little girl and a missed art show, what would you have done? Stayed in your seat or walked out? And if you were me, would you have told him to go back or let him choose you and live with the fallout? Do you think he was irresponsible or finally responsible to something bigger than profit? And have you ever judged someone at first glance? The tired mom, the messy stranger, the person who doesn't look like they belong in the room, only to realize later you had no idea what they'd gone through just to step inside. Tell me in the comments what you think, whose side you're on, what matters more to you, reputation or real life. And if you've ever had a moment where one choice changed everything, I want to hear that too.